What would you be willing to go to jail for? You ever asked yourself that question? It's kind of interesting, isn't it? And all of the rebellions of the current age, whether it be teachers who are standing and striking and saying, we'll go to jail, students who are tearing up the campus, revolutionaries of one kind or another, ultimately, when the time comes, the vast majority back out. They don't really mean that they're willing to go to jail. What would you go to jail for? Would you go for the concept of freedom? Would you go for the concept of faith? Would you be willing to spend years in jail because you dared to believe differently than the majority of other people? What would you die for? Would you be willing to go through the horrible death of being burned at the stake because of your belief about baptism? Because your belief about baptism opposed that of the majority? Would you be willing to stand as Edward Whiteman, the last Englishman to be burned at the stake under the reign of James I, and after a year's trial stand and be burned because he dared to say that baptism was not for infants but for adults? That was cause enough in the England of James I to be burned at the stake. The reason I raise all of these kinds of things is because for most of us, the concepts of what one practices and believes have become so nebulous that we don't really think it's worth fighting over anymore. It seems for most of us that whatever anybody believes is okay as long as they honestly believe it, and we don't set up standards of judgment to try to understand what belief and practice is all about. We either go through a rote memorization, oftentimes called catechism in some of our sister churches, or we say with sort of a blithe spirit, we expect that you will understand the principles and we don't have to talk about them. When's the last time that you ever sat down and tried to understand what a sacrament was all about? And how many sacraments there are? And why we call it a sacrament as opposed to our Baptist brethren who call it an ordinance? And what do we mean by rites? When's the last time you sat down and tried to understand what it means to be baptized? And historically, what is the role and the function of baptism in the church? How often have you given consideration to the questions of what happens when we gather, as we're going to in just a few moments, around the Lord's table? The Holy Eucharist, not used as such in this church, but called in other churches, communion, the Lord's Supper. What is the significance of these kinds of things in our own life and practice? And to those of you who would say it really doesn't matter, I would remind you of Edward Whiteman. It mattered so much that he was willing to go to death by the stake in order to keep and foster the principle of free choice. And that if it had not mattered for Edward Whiteman, we would not be here today. For it was the spirit of Edward Whiteman and the others who went through the torture chambers that opened up the freedom for us to say, it really doesn't matter. My point is, we better start saying, it does. What is a sacrament? It comes from a Latin word, as you might well understand. Most English words do at one point or another. Sacramentum, an oath of allegiance, or an obligation. An obligation. In the Catholic Church, how many sacraments are there? It's the kind of stuff that you get in a class if you're dealing with confirmation. So I want you to know as much as your kids do, so when your kids come home and ask you, you can answer them. How many sacraments in a Catholic Church? How many? Huh? 7. Amen. We got some of you listening to your Catholic friends along the way. How many in a Baptist church? Come on, Baptists back there. None. 4. Well, We got 7 in the Catholic Church, none in the Baptist Church, 4 in the Baptist Church. How many in the Congregationalist Church? Well, come on. You see, I got you off raid now. How many? 2, 3. What are they? Baptism? Communion? What's the third one for the one who said 3? Marriage, somebody said. Well, you see, here we are with all of those wild, wild guesses. You're all within the realm of possibility. I mean, if there's only 2 and you say 3, you're only 50% wrong, right? Catholic Church has 7 sacraments. Protestant churches have 2, almost without exception. While the Baptists don't use the word sacrament because it sounds too Catholic, if I might be so bold, they do use the word ordinance. It's a little name game kind of a thing, but it means the same. 2 sacraments. There are 2 portions of our church life under which we feel an obligation to participate. Wide variety about what we mean by that. Both of them are to be found in the teachings of Jesus. The only 2 sacraments that Jesus himself, according to the New Testament, participated in was baptism and, of course, the Last Supper. All of the rest were non-participatory by Jesus. Now, it's interesting. Did Jesus baptize anybody? Yes? Did he? Who did he baptize? No. Well, didn't he? Who didn't he baptize? Did he baptize anybody? Well, it's one of the curious things of the New Testament. There is no specific record of Jesus baptizing anybody. There's a very curious verse in John that says, Jesus baptized not except his disciples. And the interpretation is one of 2 ways. He didn't baptize anybody but his disciples, or he didn't baptize, only his disciples baptized. And it's one of the impossible verses to solve. But he was baptized himself. Who did it? John. Good. We got 100% on that one. John the Baptist of Congregational fame. John the Baptist Congregational Church. Now, what about the Lord's Supper? What about the Lord's Supper? Did Jesus participate in that? Well, he instituted it according to the words of the New Testament. It was picked up by Paul, and the original Lord's Supper was part of the normal day after day evening dinner. We'll come back to that in just a moment. Now, we baptize infants. The Baptists and a number of others baptize only adults after they've made their belief, and so in the Congregational Church we baptize infants, but we ask the infants to do something afterwards. What's that called? Confirmation. The parents pledge, as they did last week, as they will next week, the parents in the church pledge to support and to give an education of Christian nurture to their children, and then after a period of time, when they have grown into that Christian nurture, the children themselves, as young adults, are asked to confirm what their parents had already done. Ed Whiteman died because he didn't believe in the baptism of children, so we would probably have been there, some of us, lighting the stakes too. He argued it was only for adult baptism. So confirmation within the Catholic Church is the third of the sacraments, and those of us who like to just play with it say that baptism and confirmation are really 2 sides of the same coin and don't see it as a sacrament, but that's not here or there. Penance, also within our Roman Catholic Church. Holy orders, holy matrimony, and extreme unction, final rites, are all considered to be sacraments and obligations within the Catholic Church. And it's interesting that at no one time can any one person have all of the sacraments. Why is that? Yeah. Well, no, you can have, that's right, you have to be dead to get the last rites, that's true. I was thinking more, and you can't be a member of the holy orders and at the same time holy matrimony. You have to have one or the other at that particular point. What's a rite? A rite's merely the ritual that we use to do the sacraments and a whole host of other things, including the ceremonies. It's a marriage ceremony, that's a rite. R-I-T-E. We are now engaged in a little different rite. Those of you who are longtime members of this church have always had enjoyment watching to see how the people serving the communion got behind the table. Somehow or another, we never did it twice the same way. So our computer analysis, put it on the computers out there in Oakland County and ran it through to figure out how to do it and gave us a chart. Now we have a flow chart how to get up here. And so the choir members, and you do not have to be a member of the choir to serve communion, but our choir members happen to all have robes, and since Chris is mini-skirted and it wouldn't look proper, we put a robe on her too, and she's going to serve communion as a deaconess. And they're going to come up here correctly. That is a rite. That's the style and the form which you go through. A marriage ceremony, a funeral service, depending on what it is. So when your kid says, what is a sacrament? You say it's an obligation. How many do the Congregationalists have? They have two, that they hold: baptism and the Lord's Supper. What about other churches? They have others, but that's ours. What is a rite? It's the form in which we do the outward celebration. Sacrament itself is both inward and outward. Very good. Are you ready to take a test on that? A month from now, when your kids are getting it down in Sunday school and in junior high, you better be ready. What's baptism? One of two sacraments. Will fly. It comes from a Greek word meaning literally to dip or to submerge. That's why the Baptists are absolutely right. There is no doubt in anybody's mind who is an honest, legitimate scholar that the original church used baptism by immersion. Put you down deep. Baptize the whole bit. Remember the great debates in which the so-called Methodist was debating a Baptist minister at one point, and he said to him, well, if you get him and baptize him up to his knees, is he baptized? And the minister said, no, he's got to go the whole way under the water. He said, well, if you baptize him to the waist, is he baptized? He says, no, you got to go the whole way under the water. He said, well, if you baptize him to the shoulders, is he baptized? And he said, no, you've got to get him all the way under the water. He said, if you just baptize him to the top of the head, is he baptized? He said, no, I tell you, he's got to go the whole way under the water. He said, you mean it's crucial to get the top of the head? He said, absolutely. He said, that's where we do it. Well, it doesn't much matter. The time and the forms and the rites change, but the original church did baptize by immersion. They submerged the people. It was part of the Jewish tradition as well. Part of the Essene tradition in Qumran as well. They believed in a form of ritual bathing and baptism, and they did it on a regular basis. But down through the ages, there's been some change, and one thing we don't know is whether or not there was baptism of children or infants in the Bible. There is no positive proof either way. It was never a question that was asked. There are whole families baptized, and there are some who argue from that, on an argument from silence, that there must have been children. But we could baptize whole families here and not have any infants. One of our families served as ushers today. There are no infants in that family, are there? Whole family worth right there. We could have baptized the whole crew of them and not had anybody under, what, 10? 12. Good Lord. Almost 12. You see? So that's not an argument. We don't know. We just don't know, and so it becomes a matter of personal preference and tradition. And the beauty of baptism by infants, and remember, I was raised totally against this, is that it commits the church and the parents to taking action throughout the life and growing up of that child. It does less for the child than it does for the parents. There is nothing magical about baptism. It is not something which totally changes the character and the soul, though there are some churches that hold that it does. What baptism is in most of the congregational churches is a symbol of the desire of the parents to be total parents in terms of the physical, mental, and spiritual care of their children. So baptism becomes a sacrament, an obligation at some stage in life. The Lord's Supper is another interesting one, and we're moving quickly because I don't want to run too late for the Sunday school teacher's sake. There are basically three approaches to the Lord's Supper. I teach your kids two big words, consubstantiation and transubstantiation. Does anybody know what those are and what the difference between them are? Huh? Where are my Lutherans today? They ought to know at least one of them. You don't know a thing. Well, good. That means we've gotten rid of that. Now we can just get something to replace it. We've got salvation for you there. What is it? Well, what do we got right here? Forgive me. It's not meant to be unholy. What is this? Grape juice. Could be wine. We had a big debate one time. We had an old Lutheran, excuse me, my eye is still running, so you'll forgive me on this kind of stuff. Great debate here, and we had a Lutheran who isn't here today. I wish he was, but his wife is. Right here. Bob Crane was chairman of our board of deacons and brought wine. He said, there's no reason why we can't have wine in this church. And Jill, his wife, was serving it. He brought it, but it never got to here because at some point she said, no way. And we ended up with the grape juice, and he was wise enough never to argue. He would argue with me, but he wouldn't argue with his wife, so we never got wine up here. But it doesn't much matter from our point of view. Now, within the Catholic tradition, it does. The Catholic Church holds that once a priest has blessed the elements, the bread and wine, which is used in the Catholic Church, they become what? Literally the body and the blood. That's the process called consubstantiation. That they become literally the blood and the body. And this caused, as you can imagine, all kinds of great debate during the time of the Reformation about cannibalism, believe it or not, in which they were accused of being cannibals. It also raised all kinds of questions about how do you handle any of these things which are left over. The fact is that the priests must see that all of the wine which has been blessed is used, and that all of the bread which has been blessed is used. And I participated in a service in which they had planned 2,000 people and about 200 showed up. Now that raises some serious kinds of theological questions, not for me. But it wasn't in his church at all. We'd sort of just have a good time in the Lord. But that's consubstantiation. Now the Lutherans couldn't quite go that route. So they have a doctrine called transubstantiation. That is that there is absolutely nothing. You can put it all under, even the Catholics would admit this in terms of their doctrine. You can put it under a microscope. Bread is still bread, wine is still wine, but mysteriously, somehow or another, the real presence of Jesus is to be found within and part of, even though it isn't the bread. You understand? One of them is an actual change. The other one is sort of a spiritual within. What's the word I want? Surrounding, aura, that it's not changed at all, but he is there. Most Protestant churches of the bent of which we are look upon the whole thing as symbolic. These are symbols of an act. Indeed, it's possible, and in some places it's been done, because wine and bread in the ancient world were much like coffee and cake in this world. There have been communion services where people were sitting around a table having coffee and cake and joined in a spiritual relationship through the communion. Most of us, because that's not the rite that we're used to, R-I-T-E, would think that it's not right, R-I-G-H-T, and therefore probably wouldn't enjoy it, but symbolic. Therefore, we ask a blessing on as much of this as we use, and we don't in any way see that there is anything different about it. It symbolizes Jesus, his love, his presence. So, in a brief fashion, a little different, I hope that you've got some things straightened out in your own mind. We've been talking about the two sacraments, baptism and communion, a symbol. But the most important thing to remember about baptism and confirmation, which are two of the same, and the Lord's Supper, is to understand something about the biblical concept of remembrance. I think this is extremely important to constantly call to our minds. Jesus said as he was preparing the people and they were moving towards the Lord's Supper, "This do in remembrance of me." That is not a souvenir form of remembrance. When Jesus used the word remembrance, he was using a Hebrew concept which has more than just a pleasant recall of something that happened. Most of the Hebrew concepts are active in the present everyday life. And therefore, he's saying, this do in remembrance of me using the concept of taking something which happened in the past and making it a present reality. A part of my life is of today. Making what happened then so real that it's happening again today and will continue to happen. I have a gimmick sermon I preach on the isness of was. I don't think I've ever preached it here, have I? Have I? I'm sure I must have talked. No, well, you haven't been around as long as I have. Yeah, I got 2 yeses and 2 no's. I guess I can preach it again. Just pick a time you two are going to be gone, eh? The isness of was. This is the concept that we're talking about. That which was is made a present reality and is in our lives. And the end of that sermon is the will-be-ness of the isness of was. That which is made a present reality in our lives will reach out and continue with us into the future. And so when we gather at the Lord's table, we do something else. 2 things. We invite anybody who would like to join with us to join. There are churches that have what's called closed communion. They argue that they will have only the members of that church join and nobody else can, whether they're a member of any other church or not. They argue that they ought to be aware of the people who are joining, and there are some churches where you have to pass through a screening process of the deacons before they'll let you join for the communion. We do not practice closed communion. Ours is open. We believe the New Testament that you ought to examine your own life and feel free to join or not join. So any of you, whether you be members of this church or not, are free at that particular point to join worshipfully with us and to participate if you will. We do a second thing which I think is interesting and symbolic. When we receive the bread passed by the deacons, we take the bread and immediately participate of it. We do not wait from the command of the pastor. This symbolizes that each one of us in our own way before God stand before God and are making a present reality of that which was to that which is. When we receive the cup, we hold that and do it in common, symbolizing that while we are individuals under God, we have a common cause and purpose. So, a very meaningful, a very quiet, a time of rededication and rethinking, a time of joining together in Christian love, a time of making real God's command to our lives, is a time of gathering about the table. It's in that spirit that we invite each of you to participate through the singing of the meditational hymn and through the service itself. God is with us.